Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, it's gonna be an interesting one as we answer the big questions around Shane Wright, or we look to answer the big questions. I have a feeling we might just end up posing more questions rather than actually answering anything, but we're gonna do our best and we're gonna try to talk about the entirety of the situation around Shane Wright and what we think could end up happening with him and how he can get back on track here with the Seattle Kraken. Also going to talk about how the team has been doing this past week, bouncing back from that horrendous road trip. We'll go ahead and call it. It was bad. Every time I start to think like, well, okay, it was a rough road trip. We went 1-4. It's like, no, you went 1-4 in like the worst way possible. So, but the team has really bounced back. We'll talk about that. Talk about the latest injuries because unfortunately we have more of those. And yeah, I'm just excited to get underway here. Of course, we got to start off by thanking our wonderful sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, RJ, the wonderful beer hall that's been with us. I mean, so long now. Like, because we were kind of reminded talking with some people yesterday about kind of how long the beer hall has been with us and everything, and it does make you think. And it's really nice, and I know the ECH community already supports them a bunch, but just given how much the support they've given us over the years, can always go there for another pretzel.
Definitely, it's always worth thinking about again too, because remember they joined us after year one, and talked about a miserable road trip. That whole season, the results were not what you'd want to see, but you know what? They believed in us and what we were doing and believed the Kraken would turn it around, and they did in very short order. So always got to shout out Queen Anne Beer Hall for sticking with us, especially after year one, to want to go and sign. Like, let's be part of that. Let's be part of this Kraken community.
Yeah, no, that was it was a gutsy move by them, but it's paid off. So respect to them. And then also real quick, got to talk about a Patreon schedule for this really week, RJ.
Yes, and I do love that it's all kind of loaded up around this week, full of Patreon bonus content. And the reason I love it is because thankfully Patreon allows you to do a 7-day free trial. So if you're thinking about maybe joining the Patreon, wanting to see what it's all about, this month is special because if you sign up today for that 7-day free trial, you can check out all of our Patreon bonus content for the whole month without paying a dime. And you can see it all for free, see if it's something that you like, and if you want to sign up for it more regularly. But we've got Dylan's prospect chat tonight, the 18th at 7 p.m. And then tomorrow we have the Armchair GM stream where I'll be going over all the Kraken cap situation, some fun proposed teardown ideas, and the cap going up maybe a little bit more than we thought. So that's going to be a good time. And then on the 23rd, we have the live game commentary. It'll be that Kraken game at the LA Kings. It's a 1 p.m. start time. So especially those of you on the East Coast or in Europe, we wanted to make sure to have a game that the time was friendly for all of you. But you can check out all three of those, plus a brand new Red Glare podcast that came out yesterday where we talk about all the league-wide issues and stuff going on around the NHL. You can check all of that out this month for free with that 7-day free trial. Really no downside to it. You get to join us for all that stuff. Doesn't cost you anything, and you can see if you like it. So lots of great stuff coming up this week.
That is some good stuff, RJ. Indeed. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to tonight in the prospect chat and recounting my game, going to the Brampton Steelheads while I was on that Toronto trip and seeing Carson Rykoff and how he's been doing. Went and watched, well, I didn't go and watch. I did watch, though, Berkeley Catton the other night. So I'm excited to talk about him and just kind of how the rest of some of those CHL prospects are doing for the Seattle Kraken. Should be a lot of fun. And all right, before we totally get into it here, the other night on the press bridge, you and I were having a discussion, RJ, a heated debate.
I love having you up here for these now.
Yes, and it was around Climate Pledge Arena, and when I'm trying to think of the best way. I'm just gonna go for it. So in philosophy, there's a thing called the ship of Theseus problem, right? And that is it's around the questions of identity, and if you change, how much do you have to change about something before it transitions to become a new thing versus just you're fixing or repairing the original, right? And we started having this discussion around Climate Pledge Arena. And you are insisting that it is the same arena that has been there since what, the 62, I believe?
1962, yeah, for
Yeah.
the World's Fair.
And I think enough of it was changed when they did the remodel slash, I would argue, rebuild for Climate Pledge Arena just, a handful of years ago, that it should be considered a new building, right? I will give you that the roof is the same. Nothing else is the same. It's a new building. And so I do want to kind of pose this to the community, because you and I have noticed over the years that different places have different opening dates for this building based off of, whether or not they take one side of this argument or the other, right? Hockey Reference has it as the oldest or second oldest building in the NHL. And then, but if you go on like Wikipedia and you look at all the NHL arenas, it is the second newest, right? Because of they take my side of my stand here. So, RJ, do you quickly want to lay out your thoughts as to why it should be still considered the same building, despite the fact that the only thing that's the same is the roof?
Yes, I will make my argument here. So I believe it is the same building. First of all, you have the roof, which is entirely the same. We can both agree on that.
Yes.
And the location is exactly the same.
Yes.
It's the same exact spot. That hasn't changed. I guess my standard for it is, did they tear the whole building down or not? Did they completely get rid of it and replace it with something new? And the answer is no, they did not. And so that's kind of where my line is. Of course, everybody can have their different opinion on the whole Ship of Theseus thing, right? How many parts do you have to replace before it becomes a new thing? But I think you've kept a very key part of it. You've kept the look of it the same, more or less. From the outside, it still has that kind of iconic shape. And I think there was certainly an effort in this case to keep it the same. So that's why I view it as the same building. I do think it's the oldest, and it is either going to be the oldest in the NHL or the second youngest, because it actually did open before this iteration of Madison Square Garden. And then you also get into questions with MSG because there were other things that were in that location, but I believe they tore it all completely down and then rebuilt it up. And also you could make the same argument with Madison Square Garden, because from 2010 to 2013, they did extensive renovations resulting in a completely new arena bowl and concourses. So is Madison Square Garden only as old as 2013, or is it 1968? Because I would argue the latter.
So the key word there is renovations. I don't think anybody said that they renovated like Key Arena to turn it into Climate Pledge, right? Because at some point it was a roof sitting over a dirt bowl. Right, there was nothing there. And so that's my argument for why it's a new building. Is you could argue that a building is what, 4 walls and a roof, if you want to really get technical, also a foundation.
Right.
Everything but the roof was replaced, which means over 80% of this, by that very basic understanding, is new. If you're changing 4 out of 5 components or 5 out of 6 components, I would argue that yes, it's something new. What it is you have a brand new building with an old roof, but it's a new building, it's a new arena. It's not the same, right? Like, they took this down past the studs, right? This was literally just a hole in dirt. That's what they took it down to, and then they rebuilt everything. That's a new building. No, if you did that to your house, you would not say, "Oh, look at my old house that the roof's the same, but it's the same house." You would not, because you would change out layouts inside and all that stuff, and you would say, "Hey, look at my new house. We were able to keep the historic roof. That's really cool, but it's my new house." That's it.
But is it a different house? That house has still been there on that same location continuously.
Right. That's happened lots of times. People have rebuilt buildings where former buildings were. You don't call them that old building. That's not how it works.
But those have been knocked down completely.
The same. That doesn't mean anything else is.
Look, I'm saying that it's an all-important part of you saying the building is 4 walls and a roof and everything, right?
Yes.
I think the location is part of that, it's hard to quantify the percentage, but when you have something that looks similar, all right, we'll let people weigh in on
Yes.
this in the comments and kind of see where they stand. But is Climate Pledge Arena the oldest NHL arena, or is it the second youngest? Everybody let us know.
Yes. I mean, trust me, I would love to say that they play in the oldest barn. I just don't. I just can't. I just can't.
Think of all the history you're throwing away. The Beatles played there twice. Elvis Presley played there twice. Or I guess
Yeah.
it's just a totally different venue.
It is a different arena. Like it is. It's on the historic land, and it was designed to evoke the memories of that previous arena, right? And to honor its legacy. I believe in all of that stuff, but you could do all of that by having a new building. And it's a new building. It's a new arena. It's a new arena with an old roof. A
I will
roof
give you
does
the-
not
you
a
can have the
building
last
make,
word.
RJ. A roof
Okay.
does not a building make. All right, so let's get the kind of the yucky part out of the way here. Let's talk about the latest injury that the Seattle Kraken are dealing with. Still waiting for the return of Vince Dunn. We should have roughly 2 weeks plus or minus a couple days left on him based on the last timeline that the team gave us. But we have a new one here, RJ, and that is the captain, Jordan Eberle.
That's right. And this is an unfortunate injury and one that looked pretty nasty at the time. So Jordan Eberle was going into the boards pretty hard during the game against the Chicago Blackhawks, and kind of his whole back, arms, elbow hit the boards all at once. And it looked pretty bad. And some clarification on that injury from Dan Bilesma. So Bilesma immediately the next day said, look, he's going to miss the weekend's games against the Islanders and Rangers. He did, in fact, miss those games. And he said he essentially had a major traumatic crash to the boards. So a lot of reaction going on in his mid-body right now. And by the way, it was originally called a lower body injury during the game. He said it's calmed down a bit today, but still more tests need to be done. I would imagine by now they've done those tests. But the real bad news also, we saw him around the arena after the game and that he missed, and he was on crutches. So that's not a good sign. And no idea how long he'll be out. We probably won't find out for a little while because due to cap and roster situations, they don't need to put him on IR or LTIR because they don't need the roster spot at all, really, because they have plenty, and they don't need the cap space because Vince Dunn's already on LTIR. So it might be a while before we find out just for sure how long he's out.
Yeah, and it's just such an unfortunate injury, such an unfortunate timing for the team because Jordan Eberle has just played so well this season. He's really, really played well. He's been a great on-ice leader for this team. It's really unfortunate, especially because of kind of potentially how serious it looked, how rough it looked, how traumatic it looked, right? Like it was difficult to see him struggling to get off the ice, struggling to go down the tunnel, and then obviously now to be needing crutches kind of tells you how rough it is, especially if it's a mid-body injury and you're needing crutches. That doesn't mean good things. So we'll have to see. It's tough because the team has been trying to figure out how best to play and survive the Vince Dunn injury. Now missing really one of your two like dependable and consistent productive forwards. It's tough, right? You're able to get through the weekend okay, but I do kind of wonder long term if he's going to be out. Like another forward is going to need to step up on a team where they already needed other forwards to start stepping up. So I think the sooner Jordan Eberle is able to come back, as long as he's able to come back and play the way he was playing, the better for the Kraken.
Definitely. And he is one of the guys you can least afford to lose, as you talked about. For a team that already at times struggles to score, I think it's easy to forget about that given some of the easier opponents they had on this homestand. But we were reminded of that plenty yesterday when they get shut out by the New York Rangers. It's going to be tough to replace him.
Definitely. I mentioned at the jump there what the situation is around Vince Dunn and his expected return timeline. We'll see how things go over the course of this week as we work back. Hi, Fuji.
Yeah, Fuji making a little appearance. He's been bored today.
Let's talk though about how the team has been doing in general here, RJ, because last week we were still very much coming off of that really rough road trip where the team, wins that first game in Montreal, goes on to lose the next four, looks just terrible, right? Like playing their worst hockey in a while. They come back home, RJ. They were able to string together 4 straight wins. You dropped yesterday against the Rangers, but as many people were kind of calling it before that game even got there, it was as much of a scheduled loss as you could probably have. Right now, this homestand so far has canceled out that road trip, right? It has brought the team back to 500. It's where they want to be, basically. You went 1-4 on the road trip. You're 4-1 at home here so far. Still have one game as part of this homestand on Wednesday against Nashville. So you have the ability to kind of go one better and really climb out of that. But what have your thoughts been with how this team has played? I know we've talked a little bit, and a lot of the post games has been about the quality of opponents that they've gotten here during this homestand, but it's hard, they at least got the result.
They did get the result, and that was the most important part. But this is just kind of confirmed in my mind that this team is mid, as we said a few weeks ago. This is a very, very mid team, even more so than maybe I thought. Because remember last week I was saying, okay, well, we should expect a 4-game win streak here because the opponents are so bad. And then that Rangers game, well, that's going to be really tough. I don't think they win that one. And it did happen exactly that way. And so in a sense, this team is actually quite predictable as far as just the talent they have on the ice. I was expecting to see maybe at least one surprise result, but we didn't. I think the biggest surprise was that the Kraken, I think, looked worse than expected against Columbus, Chicago, and the Islanders, and better than expected against the Rangers.
Yeah.
And so I remember I turned to you during last game and asked, well, is this just a team that plays up or down to its competition? And I think there's a little element of that. But at the end of the day, they're just a reliably mid team. They are going to beat bad teams. They have not lost to a bad team yet this season. They're going to lose to good teams very much more often than not. It really is just, are they one of the better mid teams or are they one of the worst mid teams? And that's going to be the difference between making the playoffs and not. And so you're going to have games like these next two, Nashville, LA, where it's going to be really important to get the points out of those, because it feels like it's just so predictable. The other games, you're going to lose against good teams. You're going to beat bad teams. Where can you make up the difference in the middle?
Yeah. And it's just so weird because the conversation before the road trip was, oh my gosh, we're finally to that stage of mid where you can say that you're in that upper part because you're going to play the good teams close and you're going to beat up on bad teams. And that's really kind of how they had been performing. And then the road trip happens and you lose to a bunch of teams that are also pretty mid and maybe not that great in Ottawa or Boston. And then you come back home and you struggle against some legit very bad teams in Columbus and Chicago. The struggles continue against, a slightly better Islanders team, although an Islanders team that was playing down a forward and with a large portion of their bottom 6 being AHL guys because they just have nobody healthy. And I was really like, oh, okay, I guess we were just wrong. Like this is they're in that bottom half of mid where they're going to struggle to beat the bad teams, and but they'll do it. But against other mid teams, maybe it trends, down a little bit. And then you come out last night against the Rangers and you put on a pretty solid performance where there was a lot of times where it felt like they were dominating play, where the Rangers didn't really look like the Rangers. And outside of Panarin making a pass that like 5 people in the world could pull off to get the Rangers on the board, I mean, they were just as in it as anybody, if not generating better quality chances. I think of some of those Jaden Schwartz chances. They were better than any of the looks the Rangers were getting. And it just makes me so confused. Like every time I think we're figuring this team out, I mean, we know generally they're going to be like mid and roughly 500.
We know what the bounds are, right?
Yes, we do. But every time I try to kind of rank them amongst the other kind of mid teams and playoff bubble teams, I just walk out more confused than ever.
Yeah, I'm with you. And that's where this Rangers game left me, is just more confused about where they stand. Again, I expect we'll get more answers over the next couple games, but it's the kind of thing that I feel like could fluctuate over the course of the season as we see better efforts, as we see worse efforts. It's just going to depend. And can they rely on things that have been going well? Also, like I've got the 2 big reasons I think they were able to get those wins reliably against the bad teams on the schedule, and even against, Vegas, which was an impressive win, even though they didn't have their best player, was goaltending, because Joey
Mhm.
Daccord has been absolutely lights out, and then staying out of the penalty box, which
Yeah.
they were even able to do against the Rangers. And I think had they not done that, it would have been a worse loss, but it kept them in the game and gave them a chance. And if they can keep those two things going, then I think we'll probably see them in the higher end, because it just does so little to give the other team any momentum. There's nothing you can grab onto in a game and use to swing the momentum in your favor if Joey Daccord is making the save every time you get a really good chance, or if you don't get a power play to try and get things going. And it's just really stifling to other teams. And so if they can keep those two things going, then I like where they're headed. But goaltending and penalties, two things that are famously hard to predict, when they're
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. We'll see now because they have a little bit of a rest. Yeah, I think the discipline on this team has been pretty remarkable as we were really kind of sitting there and thinking about it. And yeah, no penalties against the Rangers last night. Only one against the Islanders, and I believe only one the game before, which was that too many men penalty, which still
That's not
plagues
even on
this
the
group.
players.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. It still kind of plagues this overall organization, but it's that's really impressive what he's been able to do, because we talked about this a lot last season about the team needing to be a little bit more disciplined, and it was part of the reason why some of those games would really snowball out of control was they were just having a hard time staying out of the box. Coach Dan Bylsma and his staff has them staying out of the box. Whatever they're doing, they are playing clean hockey, but they're still able to go out there and try to be physical, try to clog up the neutral zone. Don't give them easy zone. Don't give other teams easy zone entries. You go in hard on your forecheck. They're just playing good, clean hockey, and that's really impressive to see from them. And yes, I think it is a key to them being able to kind of survive, especially while missing a Vince Dunn and a Jordan Eberle, right? Like those are the things you're going to need to do to hang in some of these games, and maybe even get the win against other pseudo 500 teams like the Islanders. And then once you get them back, maybe we see them start approaching that more true mid or upper mid territory again. If you just kind of have the healthy squad, that's basically where I'm sitting today. Is just like certainly without Ebbs and Vince Dunn, I feel like lower half of mid maybe makes sense. Maybe with those guys back, we start seeing that team that we saw at the beginning of the year that could play good teams close, kind of like what we saw yesterday, but then really beat up on the bad teams the way we saw in that first 2 weeks of the season.
And I guess the job right now, really, in a sense, is to tread water until those guys come back, which looks like it might be the end of the month. It might be a ways away.
Yeah.
But you have some really easy games coming up. I mean, Nashville, you could argue, but Anaheim twice, San Jose twice. If you can get the points from those, just take care of business. You're fine until you get those guys back.
I was just going to say, is the job to tread water, or is the job, RJ, as you would talk about almost every year now, to be in a playoff spot come American Thanksgiving, which is late this year, so that does help them.
Yeah, it does. And so maybe it's even more reliable predictor, and it gives you a little bit more runway to kind of make that lunge toward a playoff spot on American Thanksgiving. But it is a pretty good indicator. I mean, somewhere between 75 and 80%, depending on how many years you want to go back, of teams that are in playoff spots come American Thanksgiving end up making the playoffs. And that's a mark that a lot of NHL teams, GMs, coaches will use to kind of figure out where their squad is really at. And I think it's going to be no different for the Kraken this year. It's going to be a big indicator, especially given the 4 games that lead up to Thanksgiving, or I guess because Thanksgiving is before the 2 San Jose games. But given the those games that lead up to it or right around there, I think it's going to be really telling of where this team actually is. And you look at last year, I think it was an unusual year because 2 teams that were in a playoff spot last year did not make the playoffs. But part of that was the Oilers going on a crazy run. And then the Preds also, 18 game point streak or whatever. But usually that's a pretty good indicator of whether you're going to make the playoffs or not. Kraken are currently 1 point out of the final spot. So it's very close.
Yes. The other things before we get to the Shane Wright discussion that I feel like we'd be remiss if we did not talk about, RJ, from this past week. The first group is the fourth line. In quotes, fourth line, because they're not getting fourth line minutes anymore. They are playing more than some other lines. But that is the Yanni Gourde, Ty Cartier, and especially this week, Brandon Tanev line, RJ, was just unstoppable. They were feasting at home here where they're able to get the good matchups. Dan's able to really match them up against other teams. Going up against these kind of, bad opponents, they were able to go out there and really rack up some points. Brandon Tanev had a nice little goal streak going there for a little while. He's already got 5 on the season, RJ. Yanni Gourde's able to pick up his first goal of the season. Ty Cartier's going out there and playing well. That fourth line really did, at times, RJ, bail this team out during this homestand, and they looked good.
Especially that Islanders game. The Kraken looked very much like a one-line team.
Yes.
And that was the one line. You wouldn't expect that to be the one line of a one-line team, but it certainly was. I mean, Tanev, Gordon, Cartier have been fantastic recently. And I love this line. And we talked about it a little bit on post-game after the last game, talking about, 3 guys that have had to work really hard for everything they've got. You talk about undrafted guys who had to work their way into the NHL. And so we were kind of workshopping some nicknames for him, right? The 8th round pick line or something like that. And they have that workman-like mentality every time they go out there. They keep it really simple. They operate with a lot of speed out of their own zone. They go chip it deep. They go forecheck. They go to work. I mean, I thought one of the most indicative goals of just how they play was Yanni Gourde's first goal of the season, where they get the puck in the zone and they're just cycling in the lower zone with a bunch of speed. Tanev brings it out net front, and you know what? He doesn't have a great angle. He's right on the goal line, but he just kind of throws it on net. Yanni is there, I believe, in the goal crease, on top of Sorokin, hits him in the shoulder and bounces in. And that's exactly the kind of greasy goal that this line loves to produce, and the way that they play. And it's been super effective. Because if you're another team's line that's going out there against them, you are going to have to work your butt off. And if you do anything less than that, you're going to be spending the whole shift in your own zone. And when this line is on, it provides the Kraken with such an advantage, because it's not even their skill guys, but yet they tilt the ice every time they're out there. We don't see it all the time. We haven't seen it every game. Otherwise, somehow these guys would all be like first line players, like legitimately all the time. We know who these guys actually are. But when they turn it on, it's really something to see.
It is. And like I said, it was very much needed for this team coming back home. I feel like this homestand does not look the way it does without these guys playing as hard as they've been playing, and playing the way that they've been playing. And yeah, I mentioned it at the beginning. They've had some good matchups out there. Dan, one thing that we can say we've really seen a lot, it feels like during this homestand, at least a lot for the regular season, RJ, is a coach really trying to match lines and take advantage of those matchups. And I think that that's something that Dan was really trying to do, especially these last 2 games. And he put this fourth line in a position to succeed, and they went out there and they delivered, right? Like he gave them the opportunity, and they went out there and they seized it in a big bad way. And that's really good to see. It'll be interesting also to see, where this team ends up closer to the trade deadline. These guys are still playing that way, and what that means for the overall squad. But I think as far as the Kraken making the playoffs or competing for a playoff spot, being in that playoff spot by American Thanksgiving, just all of the team success stuff that anybody would want to see, this line is going to have to play an important part in that. As this is a depth team that's going to, it's going to need to take a village for this team to succeed, and they're going to be very much a part of that. And They look like they're doing it right now. The other person that I want to highlight is Riker Evans, RJ, because you could also say that this homestand was the time that Riker Evans really cemented himself as one of the top 4 defensemen on the Seattle Kraken.
And he was often the ice time leader too in these games. I mean, he was playing kind of crazy minutes. 24 minutes against the Rangers, 22 against the Islanders.
24.5 against Chicago.
Yeah. So he's been playing upwards of 20 minutes a night, really, for the last 5 games, this entire homestand. And we know that he's capable of doing this, maybe not at the NHL level. We've seen it consistently, but Dan knows he can do this, because this is what he was doing with the Coachella Valley Firebirds. And Dan Bilesma has seen that. He trusts his guy, and Evans has really taken a big step forward as a minute munching defenseman, and still a pretty young one at that. And I think he's looked really impressive over these last few games, and that's super valuable, especially when Vince Dunn is out of the lineup. Look at the minutes he's playing and the situations he's in. He is in Vince Dunn's spot.
Mm-hmm.
He is doing his best Vince Dunn impression. And look, Vince Dunn is still a level greater than Riker Evans, but man, Evans looks pretty close at times. I mean, they play in very different ways, but as far as the effect of what he's able to do in that ice time, he's holding down the fort.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the ice time. I was going to mention the ice time. The other thing, though, that I want to mention is he's now third on this team, or tied for second on this team in point scoring.
Mm-hmm.
So just
he's producing.
Heads up for everybody, but he is producing. That's where you would expect Vince Dunn to be, is up there. He's tied with Brandon Montour in points so far on the season here. And then what I find interesting too, RJ, is I go and I look at some other stuff, and these aren't like the greatest defensive metrics or anything, but they're stuff that people can wrap their heads around. I go and I look at blocked shots, and he's just a couple behind his defensive partner right now, Adam Larson. They're both a ways behind Jamie Alexiak. Jamie Alexiak is, of course, the guy on this team that really blocks the most shots, but he is up there in their range at least when it comes to shot blocks. And then I go and I look at hits, RJ. Riker Evan leads the D corps in hits.
I wouldn't expect that.
As the leading scorer amongst the D corps, he is also their hits leader, behind only Ty Cartier, Brandon Tanev, and Ellie Tolvanen on the team. But Riker Evans has been out hitting Brandon Montour, who's next up, and then Will Borgen, and so on and so forth. But yeah, Riker Evans is finding ways of getting it done in, different, multifaceted, which is what a top defenseman has to do. Right? It by nature, a defenseman has to be able to hang in the defensive zone. I feel like he's been able to. I feel like he's been able to be a little bit of a menace out there. He's been able to rack up hits. He's been able to block shots. He's been able to get his stick on pucks, which has been really impressive for me. I didn't realize he had that many hits just because it seems like a lot of times he really uses his stick to poke check the puck away more so and just have solid positioning rather than lay out the body. But apparently he's been laying out the body and we just haven't been paying attention. I just think all of that's really impressive.
Yeah. Now, one word of caution I would normally give with the hit stats, seeing he's racking up the hits, he's racking up block shots. Oftentimes that's going to happen when you're in your defensive zone. And so those numbers can maybe be a little bit misleading, or those aren't exactly what you want, because you can't hit somebody if you have the puck, and you can't block a shot if you have the puck and you're in the offensive zone. But looking at Evans' numbers, I mean, he's on the ice for about roughly half of shot attempts while he's out there, which is pretty good, especially considering he's only starting in the offensive zone about 40% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect him to get a little bit more at 5-on-5. I would expect him to maybe even get more offensive zone starts, just given, the offensive nature of his game. But he is paired with Adam Larson, so I feel like he is taking a lot of that defensive responsibility, and he's turning it into more possession, more shot attempts than what he's starting with. So that's when we almost kind of want to double check the stats to make sure it's not an indicator of something bad. And I think it all checks out.
No, it just kind of does. I think the biggest concerning one would be the amount of giveaways. He's got a decent amount of giveaways, but that's something that just comes with somebody who plays the puck. Right.
That you do have to have the puck to give it away.
Yes, you do have to have the puck to give it away. And I will just point out, Brandon Montour is tied for the team league in giveaways. Nobody would say that Brandon Montour is irresponsible with the puck, right? It's just a symptom of, if you're somebody who plays the puck a lot, you're going to have giveaways because you have to. It's just a volume-based approach kind of thing. So just want to throw that one out there. But yeah, Riker Evans is playing really well. I still feel like the only place he really has, RJ, to kind of hit that next level and grow, besides just the general growing and getting more comfortable being in this kind of newfound top D pair role at the NHL level, is on the power play. I still feel like him quarterbacking the power play is, Vince Dunn's going to have that spot when he comes back, we'll say, right? There hasn't been too much power play production from him, and I don't always feel like he's on the same page with the other guys, and I don't feel like he necessarily adds anything dynamic to the power play. Again, it's a Kraken power play. There's not many guys that add anything dynamic to it. So it's not like he's alone there, but I would like to see him maybe try to get a little bit more creative out there when he's on the power play.
I'll agree with that. I think the power play as a whole has looked not all that great the
Yeah.
last few games. And I don't think it's entirely a problem of Riker Evans. I think it's kind of down to everybody on the 5-man unit, but he is a part of it as much as anyone else is.
Yeah, but just wanted to give Riker Evans his dues because he's been playing really well right now, and I know Edzo's been noticing and talking about it on the Kraken Hockey Network broadcasts, and people have been talking about it in the post games and stuff. But this was kind of the first little bit of time that I've been able to like look at the numbers and be like, oh yeah, no, I did realize he was racking up assists. I did not realize he was second on the team in scoring.
I didn't either. That's really impressive.
Tied with Jordan Everly and Brandon Montour. It's good company to have.
Yeah. It's a contract year also.
That is true.
Talk about that on Armchair GM.
That is true. Now, as we transition over into the Shane Wright discussion here, RJ, on this mid team, which I'm just now realizing also has scored 55 goals and allowed 55 goals. So way to go, Kraken. Mid. You are just so perfect at this. It's incredible. We got to talk about
It's not
Shane
the
Wright.
first time we've checked in on a podcast, right? What, a couple weeks ago, they also had an even goal differential.
Yeah.
And we're 500.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like this homestand almost perfectly, like just wiped out the road trip. Like it just perfectly matched it in the other direction. It's really crazy how they managed to do that. I got to talk about Shane Wright. And Shane Wright, we've talked about him on post-game lives. We've talked about him on the podcast and stuff. And he, the latest on him was that he was a healthy scratch last night for Ben Myers. Ben Myers comes in, takes Shane Wright's spot because, as Disco put it, his play was trending in the wrong direction. And a lot of people have been noticing this, talking about it. Again, I guess as much all the people that were talking about Riker Evans, Edzo, and everybody in post game live, they've also all been saying the same, the opposite about Shane Wright and the way his play's been in decline here for the last little bit. RJ, it ultimately culminates with the healthy scratch yesterday. Dan said that he talked with him for a long time yesterday when telling him the decision that the team had come to, that he was going to sit, reminding him that, look, you had a fantastic training camp. You played well there. We want you to get back to that stuff, the stuff you were doing right. Just sit this game out, focus on it, and use this as a reset, right? The emphasis on training camp and the emphasis on reset were very much there from Dan Bilesma last night when talking about what he said to Shane Wright. And look, I think that's probably something that needed to happen here. I know I've defended Shane Wright's play and the lack of point production, RJ, because at least for a while, his play was still really solid. He was going out there and he was playing well. We talked about that it looked like maybe his mentality wasn't the best mentality to have, just because, he very much seemed to be embracing the whole like fourth line center minutes role where he was just going to go out there and try to have positive puck possession and go from there rather than focusing on scoring goals and being too offensive. It seems like maybe that's a little bit of the direction that the team was feeling as well, was that they want to see a little bit more from him. And I feel like if it was just the point production, we would have seen this sooner. I think what's starting to concern them is just how kind of comfortable he was maybe looking as, de facto fourth line center.
And that's really the difference in his play, right? We were defending him earlier this season because, yes, the point production wasn't there, but you could go and look at screenshots from when the puck goes in on a bunch of goals, and he's right there in front of the net. He's around him. He's on the ice. He's a part of generating all of that. You haven't really been able to say that the last few games. And I do think his mindset kind of changed there. And sometimes when that's the case, it does help to take a game, take a step back, and reset. And I think that's what Dan Biles was hoping with Shane Wright. And he said he had a meeting with him and kind of talked with him about, what he wants to see. And of course, we don't know the details of what was said at that meeting, but I know you were saying before we were recording this, that you have a feeling, right, that confidence is a part of that going back to that confident training camp self, the Shane Wright with the Firebirds, who just went out there, knew he was one of the guys and just went and did it because he was one of the better players out there. That's the Shane Wright that needs to come back. And so I'm sure he'll have a chance coming up to kind of get back to himself on that. But I think you said it also too before we started recording. I do want to bring this up. You said if anybody can turn this around, right? If anybody can turn around Shane's mindset and get him back where he needs to be, you said Dan Bilesma was in that select list of people.
Yeah, because we were talking about like extreme cases, right? And I was going to get into all this stuff of,
Oh, sorry if I got ahead of you
as
there.
far as like what's going on with Shane Wright, what does he need to do, and then the larger conversation of like, should Kraken fans be worried about this 4th overall pick who now is 20 years old and is being healthy scratched, right? And like, what does that mean? Is he a bust? Because that's starting to get thrown around, all of that kind of stuff. But yes, Dan Bylsma is one of the few people that I feel like is perfect for the situation because we don't necessarily know from firsthand experience, but we know a lot from going back to his draft year, all the conversations and interviews that him and his parents have given, and his junior coaches, and all of that kind of stuff. That Shane is one of those guys that he really takes to heart when people kind of just directly communicate to him, and he responds well to that. And that's the kind of guy that he is, right? He's a communicator. He's somebody that wants the options laid out in front of him, and then he wants to work with somebody to kind of make what needs to happen. And he's going to be somebody who is going to be able to look within himself and make the adjustments that he needs to make, and then go out there and perform. And so I feel like Dan, being the kind of guy and the kind of coach, the kind of leader and developer of young players and all of that kind of stuff, that is going to sit down and have a conversation and try to have it be a productive conversation, not a, dude, we need more from you, you got to go out there, blah blah blah, and just kind of leave it at that, but one where he's going to go out there and be like, here's examples of what you were doing well. Look at this training camp stuff. Look at how you were playing in the preseason. Look at how you were playing at the beginning of the year. Look at the areas on the ice you were going. He mentioned skating, and he mentioned play with puck, right, as things that Shane was doing before, and he and then stuff that has kind of fallen off here recently. The fact that Dan can give him those examples, Shane then being the kind of guy that can go and look at those examples and internalize that, I think is really going to be a positive here, and hopefully leads to the best case scenario, which is Shane comes back and is able to get going again and play the way he was earlier in the year, because that way that he was playing earlier in the year was going to lead to points at some point. In a lot of ways, it was just kind of fluky that it wasn't, given how around all of the plays he was.
And he was also around. I was thinking he was also around very skilled players when he was playing with like a Jordan Eberle and McCann. Yes. That was a big part of it as well. And so I do wonder who he's going to be playing with when he comes back as well. Sorry if I'm getting too far ahead of this. We're not going in the order you want.
But. No, it's okay. I mean, that was one of my things, as far as like, once you bring him back, what do? Well, he played his best stuff, and he had the mindset you want him to have, and the mindset he had earned, he had played with in training camp, and he had earned basically the ability to play with Jordan Eberle and Jared McCann, right? Like, his training camp was so strong that he like, that's the line that Dan put him on, right? Like, he had earned that. And I think that if he comes back and you want to give him the best chance of finding that portion of his game again, I think you should match him with guys like that again, instead of giving him line mates like Daniel Sprong and Eli Tolvanen, where he's going to really have to do a lot of work. He's going to have to put in a lot of defensive effort to help make up for where those guys are a little bit more deficient. And you're just going to kind of put him back in that mindset where he's so worried about kind of cleaning up other things that he's not going to be focusing on his play with the puck, because he's just going to be thinking 80% of the time about just getting the puck out of his own zone. And I think that's a real detriment to him. And I do feel like some of this is because Shane just got lost in the line shuffle and was just kind of ultimately put in that spot. And this is what we were kind of worried about all along with Shane Wright, of it's not good for a player's development just to get them to the NHL as soon as possible, but then have them play on the fourth line, right? It builds different habits. And I talked about this a lot last year, when people were clamoring for Shane Wright and the only option would have been to have him on the fourth line. Fourth liners build completely different habits. It's such a different style of game that you are playing down there that you're going to be spending all of that early, building your fundamentals at the NHL level, focusing on a bunch of stuff that you don't want that guy to really care about because you need him to be offensive. And I think that kind of started happening here where Shane Wright was on the fourth line and the fundamentals he was building, RJ, where we just need to be, kind of expected goals for positive, and that's really all that matters here. And so let's just dig it out of our zone, let's chip it up the ice, and then we'll go in hard on a forecheck and really make sure our the top three lines get a rest on the bench, and then we'll get out of here. And that's just not what the Kraken need Shane Wright to turn into, but that was the role he was given, and he kind of just accepted it and went for it because he's so team first. But that, I think, was kind of to the detriment of everybody.
And yeah, almost too team first, right? He's almost too aware of the role that he has and wanting to play it well. And I think that's the kind of thing he needs to snap out of. But you're absolutely right about the differences in playing that bottom six role versus a top six role. That's one of the reasons that we were so in support of Ryan Winterton. As good as he looked in training camp, there was not going to be a top six spot for him with the Kraken. We thought he was better off going to Coachella Valley this year. And yeah, he's their leading scorer right now. And he's learning those habits to go and be that guy and go dominate. And so you're seeing kind of the flip side of it, with Shane Wright here and the role that he's been given. So I think when he comes back, he needs to be in a different role. That line with Tolvanen and Sprong was just so bad. I hated that so much because Shane basically had to cover for both wingers, especially in the D zone, and they were always in the D zone. He needs to be put in more of a position to succeed. And maybe that even means moving him out to the wing. I would be open to that and looking into that. Because it takes away some of the defensive responsibilities, takes away some of what he has to do, but he can still have that shot. He can still go out there and try and score. That's the kind of thing I would look for, at least in the short term. And then in the longer term, I loved one of the suggestions on post game last night was when Jordan Eberle does come back, if Burakovsky still looks good on that top line, you put Wright with Eberle, because I think, as you said, if there's one guy as a coach that can help turn Shane Wright around, it's Dan Bylsma. If there's one player you can put him with that's going to help him get in the right mindset, I think it's Jordan Eberle.
I do too. And they obviously have had good experiences together. I mean, so much of Shane's production at the NHL level, nearly all of it, has come with Jordan Eberle on his wing. I would absolutely do that. And if Jordan Eberle is going to have to miss time here, where he's going to be out like a couple weeks, let's say, then I think, you can have Shane come back as a winger, focus on that stuff. You've got Ben Myers up. He can hold down that fourth line center spot, right? And I even talked about before with you, I was joking. I was like, one of the things I would love if Dan said to Shane is like, look, if we want a fourth line center, we'll call up Ben Myers. Like, we will not use you as the fourth line center. That's not what you're here for, bro. I don't know that he would say bro, but
I can't picture that.
Dan spent a decent amount of time on the West Coast. I don't know that he spent that much time on the West Coast, but that's like that is kind of, I feel like, the message that needs to get across to him, which is just like, okay, we recognize that you were maybe put in this spot, but it was maybe more of a challenge. It wasn't us saying, hey, we need you to do this for the team, maybe as much as it was a challenge of, hey, you want more, you go out there and earn it, kind of thing. And I do wonder if there was maybe like, a miscommunication there with all of that. I don't know. But I think if you could have Shane on the wing for a little while, it would do a lot for him. I'm normally not in favor of moving kind of natural centers to the wing because I worry about like the defensive development. But you just don't have to worry about that with Shane. The defense will always be there for him. He's always going to be responsible out there. Go ahead, move him to the wing, let him focus on offense, let him just build confidence playing with the puck. Because one of the things we did see as I was starting to kind of dig into it a little bit more was the turnover numbers from Shane were very much trending in a bad direction. And that is something that I think the team also was kind of recognizing and saying like, okay, he's the play with the puck is really starting to slip here. And I think that was a worrying sign for them. And I think that's also in part what led to this.
Yeah, I think that's a part of it, certainly. I'm curious though, I mean, about the the long term, because I think we kind of talked about this, because I want to get to that takeaway from you, because the big question is how much of a problem is this potentially for the Kraken in the long term?
Yes, and the concept or the ideas floating around of him being a bust. I went back and I looked at his draft class kind of as a whole right now, and then also I went back and I was looking at the top fives, really top tens of each draft class from 2022 when he was drafted, going back to 2015, to look at other players and see, look, who gets off kind of slow to start their NHL career, but then they figure it out and they can go on and start producing points. And as you'd expect, most players, their first full season at the NHL level, RJ, not great, right? Like, it's not indicative of what they turn out to be. And then usually that second season, they start going up from there. There's the age thing starts becoming interesting, though, because generally for a lot of them, especially when you're looking at top 5 picks, and certainly somebody like him who was in conversation to be first overall, it kind of changes a little bit, because you'll see some of that stuff, but then you're generally looking at guys starting their careers and having that first full NHL season at 18 or 19. And then by the time they're 20, Shane's age, they've already started to figure it out and they're starting to produce more. So I'm trying to figure out and weigh here how much is age important versus just general NHL experience, and then also factoring in the lost COVID time that he had, because he was in the OHL. The OHL had no season during 2020. It just did not exist. And that was, he was very much in the OHL. He had just played his exceptional player status season. That was going to be his second year in the OHL. You got to think that was when he was going to really have figured out the OHL, really start producing, really get going, really build up that confidence. And that season just didn't exist for him. And a select group of players went overseas to play in Europe, stuff like that. He didn't. He just essentially had an entire year of hockey just removed from him at the age of 16. And it's tough to say how that impacted him. So I tried to look at his whole draft class to see how it's impacted all of them. And when you look at the 2022 NHL draft, RJ, there's a lot of the guys in this top 10 are kind of struggling to find their footing at the NHL level. There's a lot of kind of rough situations that are actually rougher than Shane Wright's right now, as far as like, should he be sent down, all of that kind of stuff, because you have second overall pick Simon Nemec, who the Devils have sent back down to the AHL level to kind of figure things out. Logan Cooley, he looked like he was on the right trajectory, but then this year his numbers have only marginally gone up from last year. He hasn't really kind of taken a next step in his second full season there. Cutter Gauthier obviously is just starting his NHL journey, but has been struggling with the Anaheim Ducks so far, as he's already on his second organization since he's been drafted. David Juracek has been up and down with the Columbus Blue Jackets between the AHL and the NHL, and
rumors they might even be shopping him.
And then the rumors that they're shopping him. Marco Kasper is kind of just starting things with Detroit, but it's been a slow start. And then you've got like Matthew Savoy, who Buffalo drafted this offseason, was kind of sent to Edmonton, hasn't even really been able to establish his footing at the AHL level. And he was extremely highly thought of in that draft class as an offensive guy, and he's just hasn't been able to figure it out. You can go down to like Connor Geeky. Just a ton of the players in this draft class have really, really been struggling. Other European guys further down the first round, like a Liam Ogren, right? It's been really rough for a lot of these players, and I am wondering how much of that is because of a very key fundamental year for them at the age of 16, 17 was just kind of wiped out, and they weren't able to have that experience of, this is how you establish yourself at the next level of hockey. And that's what they're all struggling to do right now at the NHL level. And I wonder it's because they didn't learn any of those lessons as they all tried to make that jump to major junior or to, the European men's leagues in the case of the European guys.
And I'll ask you, the former scout, what do you think is more likely that this whole draft class is just going to have continuing problems and that you're going to see a lot of busts out of this draft class? Or do you think we'll just see a different development pattern for these guys in general, where maybe they're just more late bloomers this year? Like, how damaging is that really to a player's long-term development?
It's so much of the what makes a guy a bust versus not is the off ice stuff. It's the mentality stuff. It's their ability to handle large transitions like this. The largest one, of course, being coming to the NHL. So I can't say with any certainty because the situation is so unprecedented, right? Like there just hasn't been, since any of these systems have existed, a situation like this where everybody kind of had to go through something. But I will say I do think like there was something to this. It is unusual to see half of the first round struggling so much and being on that precipice of being tweener guys. Like that doesn't generally happen. But this draft class has that, and so I think there has to be something there that is larger than just a Shane Wright problem. But at the end of the day, this goes for Shane and all of them. They have to figure it out, RJ, and they kind of have to figure it out quick, because as I was looking at all those top fives, top tens going back, there are very few examples of guys after their age 20 season, after their age 21 season, that have then gone on to figure it out and kind of lived up to the potential that they originally were drafted to have. The two best examples are Lexi Lafreniere with the Rangers, who we saw last night, who really didn't figure it out until last year, when he was 21 or 22. And so he's a shining example. He's somebody that you can say, well, look, there is an example. There's still time and there's still hope. Another one being Dylan Strome, who was drafted 3rd overall, right behind Connor McDavid and Jack Eichel, who really didn't figure it out until he got to Washington a couple seasons ago when he was like 25. That's when he kind of finally turned into a point per game player at the NHL level and really got going. So there are those guys that can do it, and it just takes a little bit longer, and then they eventually figure it out. But it's not a lot of them, right? Because you're talking about going back 7 draft classes. That's 70 players picked in the top 10, 35 picked in the top 5, and I can pull 2 good examples. It's not great, right? So it's something that I do think Shane is going to need to figure out, and realistically, he might have to figure out over the course of this season, so that next season he can come in and start producing. Because after that, I think you do have to start worrying.
Right. And it seems to imply this is pretty much a make or break season for Shane Wright. And it does feel like the organization feels the gravity of that, especially by how they're handling it. Yeah.
I would argue next year is the make or break year, but given the unique path to the NHL he's taken and where he's at right now as far as his game and his mentality, this year needs to be putting him in the best spot for next year for that make or break year. Right.
Okay.
Like I think he gets a little bit longer runway because of losing the year to COVID when he was younger, the fact that everybody in that draft class seems to be struggling with the same thing. 21 really is going to be the timeline where it's like put up or shut up for a lot of these guys picked in the top 5. So I think next season is the make or break year for Shane Wright, but that means this year is so important to get him to build the right fundamentals for next season, have the right experiences, build as much confidence as he can at the NHL level so that he can walk into next season hopefully ready to go. Because if he doesn't, then that starts, showing worrying signs for long-term development stuff.
Okay. And I guess I was looking at it. Yeah, I was looking at it wrong, because I was thinking 21, because he turns 21 in early January, yes, this year. And so like this, on all the stats thing, it's like this is his age 21 season, but not completely. Not really, next year is really, especially given the time that he missed.
And then it also turns into like D+3, which becomes like the year where you really need to be somebody or not. And he's still D+2 right now, draft year +2 years. And that's still in that window where guys can be figuring it out. But D+3, you need to kind of have it figured out. Like that becomes, you either have it or you don't for most players.
Yeah, and that becomes extra important for the Kraken. And you take a step back into the bigger picture too, where we've talked about it. The lack of star players. That's been
Hmm.
this team's biggest problem from year one, from day one. And they have a lot riding on Shane becoming one of those star players.
Yes. So I think what Dan is doing right now with Shane, what the organization ultimately decides to do with Shane, is going to be really key for setting him up for next season, where he's, like we said, it's his put up or shut up year, and it's going to be really important. So I don't like labeling anybody this young in their D+2 season a bust. I think that's, ridiculous to say about anybody, but I will say that you're all on the flip side. It's also beyond like, oh, he's just young, like lay off him and give him time. It's all fine. No, at some point we're kind of in that middle ground where it's like, look, it's okay to kind of be applying the pressure to him and having him try to rise to that occasion. He is at that normal stage of development. That is generally where you see it for these guys in D+2.
Yeah, and it's going to make this coming week a whole lot more interesting, as I'm sure he'll have a chance to get back in the lineup, and
Yeah.
we'll see what he's been able to learn from this time off.
I was going to say, do you think he's back in for Nashville, or do you think
I
they
I
wait?
would.
I would too.
And I think one of his better games this season was the first one in Nashville, the first time they
Mhm.
played the Predators. Yeah, I don't think he had a point in that one, but he was around, I think, 4 or 5 goals. He was like right there by the net. I think that was the game I took all those screenshots from. He was around a bunch of goals. So I would put him back in the lineup for Nashville. Don't make him sit anymore. And besides, you get a practice in there too. You get 2 extra days off in between the game. Just let him see what he can do. I feel like that's a good matchup for him.
Yeah, and just get back to his game. I mentioned like the turnover trend, the giveaway trend. The other trend has been he's just not taking shots. He's got 1 shot on goal in his last 5 games, right? And I just looked at this, RJ. He has the same amount of shots on goal in 18 games this season as he did in the 8 call-up games he had last year.
Yeah, that's really
And
indicative, I think, of his mindset.
yeah, and total shot attempts, he only has 1 more than he did in the 8 games last season. So he's just gotten away from his game. And so just like with any player, we saw it with Oliver Bjorkstrand, when a guy gets away from his game, or we've seen it with Andre Burakovsky moving around the lineup and whatever, sometimes you do need to sit them for a game and have them go through that reset, talk to them, explain to them, hey, this is what made you a great player. This is why you're on this team. You're not playing that way right now. Take some time, get right, come back and play the way that you used to play. And it seems like that's really all this is with Shane Wright. All that other stuff, I wasn't trying to blow it out of proportion. I was just trying to say that like it is a little bit more important when it's a guy this young. You do have to make sure that he hears that message, but I think Dan is the guy to deliver it to him.
And if he's going to go pretend like it was the end of last season when he was called up and shooting the puck and doing all those things, he was called up. It was for a California road trip. It was LA, it was Anaheim, it was San Jose. And you know what's coming up after Nashville?
Yeah.
LA, Anaheim twice, and San Jose twice.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good parallel. I'm still very hopeful. I think he's an extremely skilled player. I think he's a really smart person, and he's a very dedicated person who wants to do what's best for everyone. And I think that, has been a little bit to his own detriment so far this season, but I think he can figure it out. I think anybody who is an exceptional player status, who had to go on the journey that he had, is going to have the mental fortitude, the emotional maturity, and all of that kind of stuff to be able to take a lesson like this and apply it and go out there and get better. And I think it may not be right away, but I could still see a world in which the second half of the season for Shane Wright is a lot better looking than what we've seen from him so far.
Yeah, I'm still a believer. I'm still bullish on Shane Wright overall. I think we'll see that turn around. It's just a matter of when.
Yep. All right. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Deep Dive, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks once again to Queen Anne Beer Hall for sponsoring the podcast, as they have for so many years now. We really appreciate them. Go check them out, just a couple blocks away from Climate Pledge Arena, that new arena that exists, RJ, not that old arena that has been remodeled. And definitely check out all the cool stuff that we have over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. Starting tonight with the prospect chat, where I'll be talking about Berkeley Cat and Carson Rykoff and some other CHL guys. RJ's Armchair GM stream tomorrow, where you can talk about a world in which we might see $100 million cap in 2 short years, RJ. Just saying.
What are they going to spend it on?
What are they going to spend it
out.
on? Chandler Stevenson's clone. That's probably what they'll figure out the cloning technology.
When nobody watches the
Chandler
Armchair
Steven.
GM stream, I blame you.
All right, that's fair. I accept.
We will not discuss Chandler Stevenson's clone. I promise.
Yes. And then the live game commentary later on in the week. Appreciate everybody for listening, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.